So I guess we're ready to start. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ricardo Arias. I'm president of the Greater Houston Coffee Association. I'm also trade development manager at Port Houston. For those of you who are new to the Greater Houston Coffee Association, we are the organization that promotes and protects the supply chain in the coffee supply chain in the Houston area. Houston is one of 5 coffee exchange ports in the U.S., meaning that the delivery of green Arabica coffee it takes place in Houston. There's also a Harris County tax exemption that keeps the cost of green coffee imports competitive. The Coffee Association's work on these initiatives keeps the coffee industry in the Houston area. Today, we're very pleased to host John Heimsath as our speaker for part 3 of a 7-part webinar series detailing the coffee industry supply chain from farm to cup. Thank you to our webinar sponsors, ACM Logistics and Consulting and Port Houston. Now, a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our speaker. First, this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. Second, everyone is joined in listen-only mode. So if you're logged in your computer or your smartphone app, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature. You should find that at the bottom of your screen. We will try to have some questions. If you would like to ask some questions after our speaker is finished, feel free to ask them in the Q&A feature of the app. If you see a question that's already been asked that you would like to hear, please upvote it so that we can prioritize the questions that we do ask. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, John Heimsath, President and CEO of ACM Logistics and Consulting. John has more than 20 years of experience in supply chain and international logistics, and he is the 2nd Vice President of the Coffee Association. Welcome, John, and thank you for joining us today. The floor is now yours.
Well, thank you so much, Ricardo. Thank you all for joining the 3rd of a 7-part series. I also want to shout out to the 1st and the 2nd part. I'm going to be referring to them a little bit during the presentation on some time when you can go back and look at those at the time slot to see what is going on sort of as a help to our presentation. But today is what I think the most important because this is the part that I deal with, and that is from the time the cargo gets into the container, your coffee gets into the container, to the time that it gets to the port. So we're dealing with the ocean freight and also with the customs entry, FDA, USDA, security. Those are the things we're going to go into. In order to do these things, ACM has to have a couple of licenses. The licenses that we have are a U.S. Customs broker license. This allows us to clear cargo on behalf of an importer. And if you see that, I've got that license in 2006. But I've been in the industry since, well, I'm going to date myself here, but in Houston since 1988. I started cutting air freight documents for air export in 1988 with an international freight forwarder, and then moved up to do route development with a large global logistics company. I'm a travel junkie. I just love to travel all over. And it's really great to be in the industry that I'm in because whatever is shipped, it has to be received. And so in order for me to understand the supply or logistics chain better, it's wonderful that I can go and travel. Now, for the last year, I haven't traveled very much. And it's changed the way we do business because right now I'm sitting in my office talking to everybody, whereas before I would spend a day or two getting to that destination and then doing my sales calls and calls with my overseas offices and agents. So it's a big difference right now. But we have a customs broker's license that allows us to make entry on behalf of the importer. We also have an FMC, Federal Maritime Commission license, as an OTI, an ocean transportation intermediary, as a freight forwarder that allows us to book cargo that is on behalf of the exporter or importer that has their own contract with the carriers. And then also we are an NVO, which means that we have our own bill of ladings. ACGE is our SCAT code to be able to move cargo on a house bill with a master. So those are the two licenses. And that's why I am able to talk about this process of how the cargo actually moves. And I say cargo, and we're talking coffee, but it's also something that I think that we should think about. And that is that for a freight forwarder and a customs broker, we are concerned with the process of the movement of cargo and the process of the clearance of the cargo. And all the cargo, be it coffee or machinery or laser pointers or olives, these all then have to be cleared in a similar process. So for us to be able to focus on the process, on the how it is cleared and how it is moved, it allows us to then do our job well. And you guys that own the coffee or drink the coffee, or we saw Alejandro last month as the farm and grower, you all are in really involved in the what is coffee, right? So now we're going to switch over. So switch over a little bit and start thinking about how things move, okay? So as a licensed customs broker and a freight forwarder, what we do is we create the paper. We are actually paper pushers. We create the paper, the bill of lading. We make sure that the right thing, bill of lading gets to the right people. And we also create the entry documents, and we make sure that that goes through customs and USDA and FDA. And for us, success is when the cargo's moving. By the time it gets to that next point in the logistics chain, the customs release is done, or the FDA release is done, or all of the releases that need to be done have been accomplished prior to the arrival of that container at that point, okay? So for you all in coffee, let me just get back to the right slide. You don't care about how the cargo gets to you. You don't care about how your coffee actually arrives. You just care that it arrives. And so for it's sort of like it's magic. It's somehow comes in. And the truth of the matter is, and I want to shout out to Ricardo with the Port of Houston because I took his slide. Now, Ricardo is going to be our next speaker next month, so I'm going to try not to step on his toes and what he's doing. But I did take this slide because Houston has, if you look at this, the Port of Houston has cargo coming in from all over the world, right? Thousands of containers every single day are going through the Port of Houston. And the fact that one coffee container can make it in your coffee container. So for the Port of Houston, for us, it's just a bunch of containers. For you who owns the cargo on that container, it's very important that you have a smooth flow and release, predictable release, and so that you can get your cargo. So the fact that it's moving with so many containers moving every single day and it all works seamlessly so that you can pretty much forget it is pretty incredible. Now, what Alejandro started the presentation last month with the port with Guatemala. So we're going to continue Guatemala as our moving forward in looking at our one container. But this slide shows where coffee originates from. And now, also, if you haven't been on all of our presentations, you should go back to the first one. And Robert Sakowitz did a fabulous presentation. His was it was part one. It was Arabica to Zinfandel. What he's doing is comparing the similarities in coffee and wine. But if you go back and you go to his minute 7:51, you'll learn about a Kaffa goat herder in Ethiopia as far as how the coffee began. And then he'll also, on minute 12:43, is a great discussion about the different types, the Arabica versus Robusta. Really good stuff. And what he also said was that everything in coffee is basically on the 20 degrees north and south of the equator. So if you look at this map, you can see that that's about where we are. And then the big circles are by metric tons per year. And if you look, you've got a big circle around Brazil. You also have a big circle that is in Asia, and that's really Vietnam. So Vietnam, though, is bringing in mostly Robusta coffee, and the Arabica coffee is being brought in from the Central America, South America, Brazil. And we're focusing our attention on Guatemala. Now, Guatemala has 2 port sides. There's four ports total, but there are a port that is on the Pacific side, and then ports on the Atlantic side or the Caribbean side going into the Atlantic. And if and that's where the cargo from Houston goes. So the coffee that's going to be going up to Los Angeles will go out of the West Coast port, and the ports on the East Coast will do the eastern seaboard of the United States, Miami, Houston, New Orleans. And so actually structurally, the ports, the countries that have in Central America, both sides of the Atlantic and Pacific ports have a real advantage on moving cargo. And then of course you've got the Panama Canal in the bottom that is able to move forward. So here are our 2 ports in on the Atlantic side of Guatemala. And I've got pictures. I love pictures. So the first one is this Puerto Santo Tomas de Castilla, and then Puerto Barrios. Now, when Ricardo does his presentation next month, you will see that the Port of Houston has many terminals. It's very large and is able to unload simultaneously many containers, container vessels. Well, that's not quite the case coming out of Guatemala. So you have the one on the left is your larger port, which is the Santo de Castilla, Santo Tomas de Castilla. And the far left vessel has been there for years. And really the 3 vessels are the vessels that are unloading. And if you start looking there, they all have their own cranes. Many of these ports that are coffee producing ports are just, so if you're looking at the Puerto the Castilla and Barrios, both of them have a 31-foot draft. And it's also, if you could look at the water, you can see that there's a lot of silt that is in this water on this side. And so then on Puerto Barrios, you've got this is a north and south side of the vessel. And so you've got basically 5 loading docks that can then simultaneously have cargo coming in on them. Out of these 2 ports, we've got into Houston 5 container carriers: MSC, which is Mediterranean Shipping Company, Hamburg Süd, Seaboard Marine, Hapag-Lloyd, Zim Lines. And the Hamburg Süd was bought a couple of years ago by Maersk Lines, and then MSC also vessel shares. So there are only 3 strings, we call them, where there are several vessels going in a pattern, and they all look very similar. And the reason they look similar is they have to have their own cranes, right? Also, what's interesting, and I don't know, all of you that are in ocean freight can just sort of, take a drink of coffee right now, but those that are not, look at the vessels. And the vessels have a sort of a rust line on the bottom, and that's their fill line. So you can see very quickly if your container vessel is full or empty. And the Seaboard Marine is running much more full than the Hapag-Lloyd and the Maersk vessels are, okay? So those are the vessels coming to Houston. Now what we're gonna look at is the sailing schedule for one of them, for Seaboard Marine. And I picked this randomly because they had a better picture of the actual sailing schedule. But the transit time's 3 days. From the port of Guatemala into the port of Houston, the transit time's 3 days. Now, if you have cargo that's coming out of, say, Vietnam, the transit time is almost a month. Depending on the routing, the transit time could be even 56 days. So there's a lot of activity that happens on a container when it's moving from its origin to its destination. In fact, it starts with an ISF that happens prior to the vessel even being loaded, so that the US Customs can tell the foreign port to not load that container. So that happens all the way through with all the releases until the cargo gets to the United States. Now, it's really condensed when it's only a 3-day transit time. However, the same releases have to occur, okay? Also, it's good to see this picture here of Guatemala, and what happens is that your cargo first port of call right away is then Houston. So when we're talking about all the releases that need to occur, what we're looking at really is that cargo moves and the documents move separately from the cargo. When we're saying documents, we're talking about the ocean bill of lading and then the actual commercial invoice from the supplier exporter, okay? And then the money, of course, you have to pay for the container of coffee, and that's going back the other way. And it's a dance because the cargo is moving, the documents are moving separately, have to all arrive before the cargo arrives so that things can happen in order for then payment to occur. And then the supplier say, yeah, it's okay to release this container. And then the steamship line gives it its freight release. So those are the three pieces that are going on. And here is a visual of that. You've got the cargo, and we've got two banks up on top. One's a receiving and one's an issuing bank. And those are when a shipment is a letter of credit. But you're looking at the documents that are flowing one way. Cargo and money are all flowing and need to do it together. Here's another visual, and this came from the CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. It's a government partnership with the trade and to secure our borders. And what Customs has done is put the procedure together where there's a minimum security requirements for each piece of the logistics chain. And here's a picture of the logistics chain starting from the factory. And the thing to really focus on here is that to see that there are different handoffs. There's not one entity that handles your cargo from the time it gets from the warehouse that has loaded the container of coffee all the way to the roaster's location, or the warehouse before it gets to the roaster's location. There are many different pieces. And in order to secure our supply chain, Customs has put in security requirements for each of those pieces, okay? So let's just walk through that. The releases that occur in order for your cargo, the container of coffee, to actually release, begin with your ISF, import security filing. And then there's an FDA, Food and Drug, release that have to occur. And there's the actual entry, so Customs and Border Protection entry that occurs. There's a VACUS exam that's potential. That is a vehicle and cargo inspection system that would look an X-ray of the container to make sure that there are no anomalies inside. And then there's APHIS, which is your Animal Plant Health Inspection System. That's part of USDA CBP Ag that has looks at the coffee. Now there's also releases that the ocean carrier have to give. That's where the bill of lading or even payment of the cargo is talked about. And finally, the supplier has to tell the steamship line it's okay to let this cargo release. So all 7 releases have to occur on every single ocean shipment coming in of coffee. Now, coffee is more because it's food. If it would be a non-food item, then you wouldn't have the FDA or the APHIS exam. So there's a lot of stuff to happen in 3 days. So let's just walk through this a bit. The ISF, importer security filing, is actually required to be issued by the importer. So we as customs brokers file that on behalf of the importer, and we send it to US Customs, and it lists who the shipper is, who the seller is, who the buyer is, the consolidator is, what the cargo actually, the harmonized code of the cargo. So there's 10 pieces of information that we stream to US Customs. There's 2 pieces that the steamship line has already put into the system that's married together, and then Customs looks at this It's only security. Customs looks at this from the security standpoint and makes a determination on if that container can actually be loaded onto the vessel. And if it cannot, then US Customs will issue a no load. And there are actually US Customs people that are at all of the major ports around the world that work with the origin port to make sure that they work together. And this is what's happening is that if we can, as a country, prevent high risk cargo, high risk security cargo from even being put on a vessel, then we've pushed the threat out from our borders. And that's this ISF. The next, we're talking about coffee. Coffee is something that is ingested, so it's food. This is all then when all food is coming in, you have to have an FDA release. Now, FDA requires that you tell them, FDA, 24 hours, at least 24 hours prior to that vessel arriving at the Port of Houston, what's in it, okay? The FDA has a product code for every commodity that it is looking at. And the commodity code tells customs if it's coffee, and then how it's packaged, and in what form it's in, raw form, and how if it's stored at ambient temperature. All of these come in, and there's a product code builder, and that then tells that triggers to FDA all the different other releases or things that they're looking at. So with the food, it's genus and species of thing. So all of these things come in for an FDA notice of arrival. Now, when we're sending the notice of arrival, they're also picking up USDA if it's organic or not. And that is just, it's a piece that comes up in the prior notice. FDA is putting in the foreign supplier, and that foreign supplier and also the US importer, all are registered prior to FDA, prior to the shipment. And you can't bring in any coffee that's coming from a non-registered exporter. Though there are, as we do this process, there are a whole a bunch of different activities that have to be done by the importer and the supplier in order to assure that once it comes in, that FDA will then receive that notice of arrival and then say, yes, it may proceed. And then we have the customs entry. We can stream the customs entry up to 5 days prior to the vessel arrival. Well, we only have a 3-day transit time, so it's pretty quick on that. And it then goes through selectivity. And what customs will do is we'll stream the entry, and customs will come back and say either paperless release or entry docs required. And then once the entry docs required, then the customs would come in and look at that. And every customs has centers of excellence around the United States that are based on commodity grouping. You'll have customs specialists in those areas of excellence that then will look at the product. So these are product specialists at customs, and they will then look at the documents, if it's documents required, and determine whether a next layer of intervention is required. And if they do, then it will then be overridden. There will be an override to intensive. So there'll be customs and either a paperless release, an entry docs required, and then a release, or override to intensive. And then you have the exam. And after the exam, you'll have a reloading of the container and then the release. And exams are not done at the port in Houston. They're done at different customs exam sites. So there's a permit to transfer for the container to move out of the port and over to the customs exam site and then back. So there's quite a bit of activity that is going on with the release of these containers of coffee. So by the time you get your coffee, you know that it has gone through these processes and is safe for you to drink. Now, VACIS is another. This is called Vehicle and Cargo Inspection System. And it's actually it's an X-ray exam on a truck. And so it's mobile. And I think that Ricardo is going to talk more about that. But what it does is it looks inside the container without having to open the container. And the customs will look at what the X-ray of the container inside, as then they'll look at electronically the documents that have been sent and look for anomalies. And the number of containers that are set up for VACIS on every vessel is dependent on the risk level that we're in. So whatever the color code risk level, as it goes up, more containers are targeted for a Backus exam. Okay. Then we have the USDA, which is CBP Ag, APHIS. And I say CBP Ag and USDA because back before 9/11, you had all of Customs was a part of Treasury. And now Customs and Border Protection is part of Homeland Security. Well, you also had USDA and you still have USDA, but there's still parts of USDA that are a customs enforcement piece. And so you have a CBP Ag that is dotted line USDA, and both of them are involved in the actual code that's written for what needs to happen for APHIS, which is your Animal Plant Health Inspection System. What happens, your container will arrive, and prior to the arrival of the container, you will see that it's on an ag hold, or they're going to be an ag, will be with the inspection. And the ag inspector and but the ag inspector is at this point really CBP Ag, and CBP Ag also looks for, on behalf of FDA, on this initial tailgate exam. So they'll open up the tailgate of the vessel, of the container. It's sitting on a chassis in the Port of Houston, and they'll look in the back and they'll see if they can see anything that what they're really looking for is they're looking for bugs or beetles or any infestation. They see anything like that, then they will issue an override to intensive, and then the container will be moved off-site to an exam site and then unloaded, completely devanned. And what happens is, once the devan occurs, the CBP Ag person will go in and look and pick up different samples of the pest. Okay, those samples will be sent to the entomologist that is then going to look and see if that bug is actionable or not. And if the bug is actionable, then you will have an issue. What will happen is you'll get an EAN, an emergency action notice. And I say you will get, this is us, the customs broker will receive a notice that this is an emergency action notice. This specific pest was found. And then once it's found, then based on the pest, they'll have to have a certain type of fumigation and the chemical that it will be used on the fumigation and how long the fumigation will occur. It has to take place in order for the bugs to be eradicated. And once that occurs and the fumigation happens, then you'll have your USDA APHIS release. Through this whole thing, Customs has been looking at coffee and making sure that the invoice and the coffee are matching, and the origin, supplier, and the manufacturer ID code and the harmonized code, all is within their low risk threshold, and you have a customs release. 98% of our entries that we do are paperless. We stream them, and just an algorithm is used at Customs, and 10 seconds later, we'll have a selectivity and a release. However, the customs release, if it's entry docs required and then looked at, could then take several days after the vessel has actually arrived with your container. So you have all your government holds removed. APHIS is not an issue. FDA has a may proceed on it, and your customs is released, but you're not quite ready to go. Your container's not yet been told, the terminal's not yet been told electronically that all of the holds are removed. And the reason is you have carriers. Your steamship line is acting as a sort of a middleman between the exporter and the importer. So when the coffee container is shipped out, the exporter of coffee hasn't received their money yet. Very, very seldom is there a prepay on, you prepay for your coffee before you actually receive it. And so the steamship line acts as sort of an independent entity. And the shipper will ship the cargo, and the steamship line will send the shipper a bill of lading. have the shipper, consignee, all of the information about the coffee on that bill of lading. The bill of lading can then, if as soon as whatever the arrangement is between the buyer and the seller have occurred, the seller will then send those original documents, the original bill of lading, to the importer. The importer will endorse the back of it and send it to the carrier. Once the carrier receives that bill of lading, that endorsed original bill of lading, then they are authorized to deliver, to release the cargo, to let the terminal know that that container no longer has a bill of lading hold on it, okay? Now, if the steamship line releases that cargo of coffee without the authorization of the shipper, the steamship line is responsible for the total value of the goods. So it's why it's a setup. It's pretty amazing that it happens on every container over and over, but it does this very quickly. The other thing you can do with the ocean bill of lading is that the seller can they can decide not to use an original bill of lading. So they decided that the bill of lading is not a negotiable instrument, and so it'll be an express release or a seaway bill. In that instance, what the shipper has done is at the very beginning and said it's okay to let this container go, and relieves the steamship line of their obligation to use the bill of lading as a condition to release. However, the steamship line has a second piece, and that is that they want to be paid for their ocean freight. So you have a freight release, which means the ocean freight's been paid. Oh, and if you have any of these other exams that are happening, there'll be extra charges that are due to the steamship line. And so you pay all of those, and then you'll have the carrier release. And those are the pieces that occur in 3 days with your container of coffee moving in from the origin in Guatemala to Houston. Okay, let's just step into FDA real quick, and then the CBP Ag. FDA requirements for coffee. The map that you have is Houston is in the Southwest region for FDA, and you can see in blue all of the different states that are covered by that, right? And I'm not sure why it's Southwest region. I guess the south part of California is considered west, but really it's that's the area. And for roasted coffee, okay, you need to have a prior notice of arrival because it's food. For green coffee, you need a notice of arrival as well. We've gone over that. Now, listen, you're not allowed to bring whole berries. You go back and you look at Robert Sakowitz's first presentation, he has this great slide of a berry that is in a berry form, and then it's cut in half, and then you can see it, so the pieces of the coffee. But because of the exotic fruit fly risk, you're not allowed to bring any berries into the United States, okay? For USDA, you have roasted coffee. USDA does not consider, and APHIS does not consider roasted coffee a risk. The reason is that if you look at the top right-hand corner with your beans, the beans on the top have bore holes from beetles, 2 different kinds of weevils and beetles, and you can look at the name over there. The beetles, if it's been roasted, are not a threat to infest the US because they're no longer alive. And so you can bring that in, and also they can be brought into all 50 states, and there's no restriction for you to bring it in luggage. So you can bring in, you can bring in 100 kilos of coffee as additional baggage. USDA is fine with it. Customs is fine with it. You can do that. Now, green coffee is a little different, it has more restrictions. And the green coffee has not yet been roasted, so not to the high temperature. And that means that you have to have a sampling. It's the way the USDA does this is that they reserve the right to sample every container, every bag of coffee. They reserve the right to inspect, and that doesn't mean they inspect all of them. And there is a way that they go about looking at which ones they inspect. When they do a sampling down on the lower right-hand corner, you can see what they'll go in and pull 500 beans, And if less than 30 or it's less than 38 have a problem, then they stop the exam and they know then and it's okay, it can go. And if they're of the 500, over 115 are infested beans, they stop the exam and then it needs to go for an emergency action notice and fumigation. And if it's between those two thresholds, then they just keep looking at more beans until they finish their inspection. But green coffee still has to be roasted, right? Now, this is pretty cool. When you roast coffee, customs thinks that a substantial transformation has occurred in the coffee. So the origin actually changes. The coffee you buy in, so Lavazza coffee from Italy, or I like, and there's some great coffees from Germany. I lived in Germany for a couple of years and really loved their coffee. And I couldn't understand, how is it that on the back of their coffee it says that the country of origin is Italy, or the country of origin is coffee, is Germany, because they don't grow coffee there. And the reason is that there's a substantial transformation occurs. So on the back of the coffee, if you roast it, that country where the roasting occurred is then the country of origin of coffee. Okay. And now back to green coffee. Coffee is grown in the United States, in Hawaii and in Puerto Rico. And therefore, there is no green coffee allowed in either Puerto Rico or Hawaii. You can bring in roasted coffee, but green coffee is not allowed there. Now, again, back to the whole bean berries, they're not allowed in the United States at all. That's the USDA. USDA is also involved in the determining of organic. And the only part that the customs broker is involved in, or the freight, the ocean carrier, and the bill of lading, is just the statement that it is organic. And when we do a prior notice on the FDA and it's coffee, there is a piece that comes down as organic, and then we have to say that it's list to US to FDA that it is organic. But USDA does determine the organic, and I throw this page up for that. So now let's go into the importer. So if you're sitting here drinking a cup of coffee and you're going, man, I sure would like to import that myself, what you have to first look at is the importer requirements. So there are obligations for you to follow in order to be a legitimate importer, okay? And all of that runs off of the MOD Act back in 1993. It was actually tacked on to the end of NAFTA. And now you have the USMCA and no longer NAFTA, but you still have the amended MOD Act for customs. And there was a new concept that came in. Prior to this, customs was acting as a policeman, and you would the card container would come in and they would say, okay, I'm going to look at everything, make sure it's okay, and then it can go. In fact, around the rest of the world, many ports still work this way, where they are just the policeman, and it's like you're going through customs at the airport. You've got that every single person is being looked at, and that then delays everything. And what with this idea of a shared responsibility, it is the customs and government's responsibility to ensure that there is legitimate trade coming in, right? So smooth movement of legitimate trade, and also to make sure that there is no illegitimate trade, right? That's their responsibility. But they're saying, oh, wait a minute, it's also the importer's responsibility to demonstrate reasonable care and oversight in the things that it tells customs it's importing. And so down here on the bottom, it's actually the phrase, right? The importer of record is responsible for using reasonable care to enter, classify, and determine the value of imported merchandise, and to provide any other information necessary. In this case, it's coffee, so you're going to have genus and species of coffee and all of the things that are done with the USDA and FDA to properly assess duties, collect accurate statistics, and determine whether other applicable legal requirements, if any, have been met. So it's your responsibility. Now, what customs does, though, is they're required to inform. So it's an informed compliance. And so what happened right after the MOD Act is that customs and the other government agencies started putting together resources that were available to the importing community. And for customs side, there is a whole series of it's called here, let me get to the next page. What every member of the trade community should know about, and then it goes in, and there are over 100 different. There's one just on reasonable care. There's one on import. There's one on the valuation, so the entered value, and there's one for coffee. And so now that customs has informed the importing community, then it's the importing communities. That's easy for you to say. Requirement, obligation to then demonstrate reasonable care in following these regulations. Now, for coffee is duty-free. Green coffee is duty-free. Roasted coffee is duty-free. But how do you get that duty-free? How do you know it's duty-free? And this all comes to the harmonized code. Okay, it's the HTS code. Maybe people have heard of that. And this is a picture. It's all on the website. This is a customs website. This is the US ITC. If you type in HTS code in Google, you pull up a government site, you're going to get this. And I've typed in coffee at the top. If you look at the left-hand border, 0901 is coffee. Okay, coffee, whether or not roasted or decaffeinated, coffee husks and skins, coffee substitutes containing coffee in any proportion. So anything that is actually coffee is going to be in this 0901. The way the harmonized book works is it starts with chapter 1 in most basic form of an item, all the way to chapter 99. Now 97 is where it stops, because 98 you have free trade, you have US goods returned and special things. And then chapter 99, all of these, like the China tariffs that are there, that's all popped into chapter 99. But from chapter 1 through chapter 97, you'll have items, and as the chapters increase in number, you get more and more complicated. So chapter 01 is a live animal, okay? Chapter 09 are coffee beans or anything coffee, right? Now there's also chapter 21, there's extracts and concentrates. Instant coffee is 21, this is much more processed. But we're staying with now the green coffee. When you look, the article description is very general at 0901. Now 0901.11.00 is then more specific, and it drops down to coffee not roasted. Okay, so then if you're roasted coffee, you would just, all of the things that are in 0901.11 would be not, you don't have to worry about it. And then also the 12 decaffeinated, instead you drop down to roasted. And that's how this harmonized system works, is that you start general and then you go in farther and farther into build up 10 digits is what you finally have. And so if you're looking at the not decaffeinated Arabica coffee that is certified organic, your harmonized code is 0901.11.0015. If it is not organic, the last two digits change to 25. Move over and you look at statistics. Census requires that we issue how many kilos, the net kilos of coffee that's coming in, and then general, which is your duty coming out of all countries that are allowed to import into the United States, is duty free. And that's how you read the harmonized tariff schedule. If you're bringing in any product, go to the US ITC site and type in that commodity up top, and it will then give you all of your harmonized code possibilities. So I throw that out. It's really the basis of what customs and the other government agencies use to trigger what is required for that commodity in their system. Okay. And I go then finally to security. Now, if you look on our logo up on the top top right-hand corner, right? Then you'll see that there is a CTPAT logo underneath ours. And ACM, we are CTPAT partners. That means that we have met the minimum security criteria as a customs broker to then have that. We are then considered in customs eyes a force multiplier. As an importer, importer programs are the ones that receive preferential treatment on shipments that import. So if you have an import coming in and it is goes through their customs algorithm to determine whether it's a paperless release or entry docs required, it's more often that it will be less occurring entry docs required for a CTPAT. And the thing is, even if you have never had any penalties as an importer and have always done everything correctly and never really, all the time there's been an entry docs required, everything works out. You've never had an issue with customs and you have a customs track record, you still may be a hit for a VACUS exam. Because it's done as a random occurrence. However, you're less likely in this random occurrence to have your cargo looked at if you are a CTPAT partner. And if you are interested in being a CTPAT partner, you can give us a call and we can show you all the things that are required. There are also many private companies that just do that, just help companies be CTPAT compliant and CTPAT partners, but also CTPAT and customs has really put in a lot of information where you as an importer can really do it yourself. Okay, so bottom line here, security is huge, but it's also balanced. So you want to secure, government has to balance securing our border with facilitating legitimate trade. And as the risk level increases or decreases, it then it takes a higher or lower priority. Okay, so we're back now. We're almost at the end, because really what I wanted to do was to give you sort of open up and look behind the curtain and see all of the different activities that occur on your container of coffee coming in from Guatemala to Houston. And it's quite a bit, and it's condensed all down into 3 days. And yet it happens over and over again, very smoothly, so that you can drink your cup of coffee and not even think about that logistics chain. That's what we want to continue to have happen, is the logistics chain for the user and the owner of the cargo should be invisible. All right, so I'm going to turn the page and open for questions, and I thank you very much. I think I can do this.
Thank you very much, John. That was a very good and thorough presentation. I want to remind the audience that you can ask questions. I see 2 on the Q&A. I'll read it. This was from James Bear. How does it work if the importer and exporter are the same company? And is it just a transfer of assets from origin to destination?
Okay, so what we're talking about here, the easy, quick answer is that customs looks at an importer and an exporter. It's really the seller and the buyer, which customs is looking at. They want to know if there are related parties or unrelated parties. So if they are unrelated, there is no association. It's not a branch office. It's not you're sending it from your brother's not sending it to you. It's an unrelated arm's length transaction. And customs looks at an arm's length transaction differently than they look at a transaction between related parties. So what's required though on an import for you, the importer of record in the United States, right, is that you are giving the harmonized code, the commodity is correct, but also the entered value. So you're required to give a true value for the goods for customs purposes. Now, if you're a related party, customs may say, wait a minute, your invoice may not actually reflect the true value of the goods for duty purposes. And so they'll look at it differently, but the question of, can you send it to yourself? So if you're in Guatemala, can you export from your company in Guatemala to you in the United States? Yes, you can. Not only that, if the importer in the United States does not want to have the liability of being an importer, the importer of record, the foreign company exporter out of Guatemala can be registered as a foreign importer, and they can be both the exporter and the importer. I hope that helps.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. Mario Rodriguez is asking the next one. I'll read it. He says, this is a very interesting and informative presentation. Do you import coffee from other coffee exchange ports or specifically Houston? Also, who typically employs your coffee custom services? Large roasters, green coffee traders, local coffee shops? Thank you.
So the amount of coffee that we have as a customs broker is quite small. We have other food items that come in. And so the question that you're asking, really what happens is there are very few actual importers of coffee in the United States. And they have their customs brokers pretty much set. So the amount of coffee that we do is much smaller than, say, other commodities.
Excellent. Thank you. Bill Deal asks, can you please explain the difference between a customs broker and a freight forwarder, please?
Well, there's two different licenses. One's the customs broker license, one's the freight forwarder license. We have them both. What a freight forwarder does is book the cargo. The freight forwarder is working with the actual movement of the cargo. Okay, so there's a bill of lading. You book with the steamship line. You make sure that you've got a container available that can be loaded. You're dealing with then the container being set to the port and that it's actually going to get on the vessel. All of the movement of the cargo, and then the bill of lading information that's there on for the shipper and the consignee, and the description of goods and the weight and the seal number and information of the container number, and that all of that is the freight forwarder's booking exercise. That's what they do. The customs broker is a completely different license, and the customs broker acts as agent of the importer, and we then are dealing with all of the customs release, customs entry and customs release, and all of the post-entry activity that would be required for a customs entry.
Excellent, thank you. We have two more questions, and this is all we have time for. The first one comes from Amber Shepherd. Have you seen more containers being flagged with infestation or coffee pest related issues over the past few years? I ask because it has been said climate change is impacting this and causing more coffee pest occurrences with moths, beetles, beyond just the normal occurrences we see every year. Okay. Have you seen a steady increase?
Everything that we see would be anecdotal, and we don't. What we've seen is that it will rotate from country to country. So things that are originating in Colombia, depending on the time of year, will have a higher or lower rate. There's imports from Europe. There's snails that come out of Europe, and they all are in the spring and the early summer, and so that there's a higher rate there. But the question that you ask of, has it increased over time due to climate change or anything else, is something that we can't answer. And that's because customs and FDA and USDA, the government, they don't give us this information. And the reason when asked is because they really are wanting to make sure that no one games the system. So if there is, if they would put out the percentage of exams at each port over time, then there could be maybe port shopping that's being done. You know, or if they see that the exams are reducing on all shipments that are coming in August and September, then maybe you'll wait until August and September to bring in your actionable items. So we don't know, and customs and the government does that on purpose.
Okay, thank you. Luis Silva is asking, good morning. Must the ISF file be provided by exporters 24 hours prior to vessel loading? I'm a coffee exporter from Brazil, and I was always told that we need to, uh, I guess it's provided 72 hours prior to loading. Once the importer receives the ISF, they probably forward it to their customs broker, correct?
Yes, so actually, the act of filing an ISF is not considered customs business. So a customs broker only a customs broker can perform customs business on behalf of an importer, and that includes the actual customs entry, right? Now, the ISF piece is done by a customs broker most of the time. And the reason is that the customs broker is doing the ISF, and much of that information is the same information that's being done for a customs entry. And it's easier for a customs broker to make sure that there are no inconsistencies between the information given on an ISF and an entry. Okay. However, the requirement is that the one who is bound by the ISF is the importer. So you are sending 72 hours prior to the loading of the vessel, the information to the importer and the importer's customs broker. And then we're taking that and filing the ISF, and we stream that to customs. Customs will come back with an ISF number. That ISF number then that'll, once we get that number, our system triggers an email notification back. In this instance, it would be to you and your freight forwarder saying that here's the ISF number, and which means that now you're okay to proceed with in-gating your container. But the question on who can do it, the exporter can do it, the exporter's freight forwarder can do it, the importer can do it, the customs broker can do it. The one who is liable for any problems should there be incorrect information on the ISF is the importer. And then the importer, that is why the importer oftentimes doesn't want the origin freight forwarder or the supplier to actually file it, okay? And they then farm that out to their customs broker because it's a second activity on the same entry. A little more info than you probably need.
Okay, and I think we have a follow-up question to this, and this will be the last one. If cargo has a transshipment port, does the ISF have to be filled prior to departing the original port, or can it wait until it's at the transit port?
Very good question. And no, you don't have to file the ISF from origin port if it's a transshipment. So if we look back at my second or third slide that had the picture of the boats, Zimline is not a direct sailing. Zimline sails through Jamaica. And so the feeder vessel out of Puerto Barrios will be a different vessel name than the main carriage vessel in from Jamaica into the United States, into Houston. So, and that transit time day is 1 day, right? So it's not, it is the parent vessel. So the no load will come off of the main carriage vessel. It's a good question.
Okay, well, thank you. This is all the time we have for today. John, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and really educating us, the members of the association and the community members that joined us today that are interested in the coffee industry. Our next webinar is going to be April 22nd, and I will be the speaker. My presentation will be coffee in the Port of Houston, and it'll basically be the process from the moment that the coffee arrives through the port, not so much the customs, but the actual operational from, unloading it from the vessel, moving it around, how it moves from the stack of containers to being, let's say, inspected through the VACAS or a USDA inspection and all of that. So hopefully, everybody will find that also very interesting. We appreciate everybody's time today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have been recording this webinar, and it will be posted on our website very soon. Thank you. Have a great afternoon. This is the conclusion of the webinar, and you may disconnect now.